So this morning, we're going to be continuing our series of sermons that we began last week, are going to be doing for the next couple of weeks, called Storytelling, where we're going to be focusing on the practice and the importance of personal evangelism. Now, I know to a lot of you, this might be something that maybe you're a little scared of or a little concerned about. You know, maybe you've had a bad experience with somebody trying to evangelize to you, or maybe you've just seen people or heard stories of people doing it in really bad ways, and you just don't want anything to do with that sort of thing. And so the way I want to start off this morning is the way I started off a little bit last week, and by telling you what this series is not about, what we are not going to teach you to do through this series, kind of debunk any fears you might have. So what storytelling isn't about. Storytelling isn't about beginning harassing conversations. We're not going to ask you to go out there and to push all your friends away by trying to overwhelm them with coming to church. We're not going to ask you to steal your grandmother's cane and never give it back until she promises to convert. I've tried that, it works, but we don't want to teach you to do that. We're not going to teach you to do anything like that because that's not what we believe God wants us to do. We don't believe that that's what evangelism is about, and so that's not what this series is going to be about. The second thing we're not going to teach you to do is become a Bible-thumping, cross-wearing, hate-smearing, street-corner proselyte. You're not going to have to stand on any corners and preach to large crowds of people. You're not going to have to hold up signs and banners telling people that they're going to hell. We're not going to give you fire hoses and make you do mass baptisms in the center of town. None of that stuff. That's not what this series is about, and so that's not what you have to do. And finally, what this series is not about is it's not about building our numbers. You know, God loves it when lots of lives are transformed, and that's a great thing. But this isn't about us. It's not about us. It's not about our church. It's about God. And it's about other people and watching as God changes their lives through Jesus Christ. And so in 20 years, we don't want to look back and just see that we had a bunch of people come to our church at some given time. What we want to look back and see is that lives were changed. Stories were changed because we were willing to go out there and share something amazing and transformative. You know, that's why this series is called Storytelling. Because it's about sharing our stories with other people. It's about listening as they share their stories with us and watching as God creates a brand new story between us. God creates a new story in both of our lives because of the relationship we have together. And so that's what our focus is going to be on today. The focus that we're going to have today is on the first part, about creating our own story. And, you know, all of us have stories. Every one of us has a story about how our life has been changed by Jesus in some way. If Jesus is at the center of your life, then you know there's a story behind that somewhere. But the problem is that we don't know how to tell it sometimes. I know that the first time somebody told me I was supposed to go out and share the gospel with other people or share my story with other people, I was terrified. I mean, I had questions running through my mind like, who do I tell? What do I say? What if they say no? What if they don't like me? What if they run the other direction? And you might be having some of those same questions in your mind as well. You know, this is something big that we're talking about. The stakes are pretty high, and we know that somebody's life could be changed and transformed by what God is encouraging us to do here. And so we want to help you with that. We want to ease your fears. And so today we're going to give you two things that are going to help you. The first thing we're going to give you is something tangible. As you walk out today, you're going to receive this right here. It's a postcard. And on the front it says, "No perfect people allowed." This is a series we're going to do starting on our big day on September 16th. And these are cards that you can use to invite people to come to church with you. We're going to give each of you at least 3 cards. If you want more, you can have them. But the reason we're giving you 3 is because we want to encourage you to invite 3 people that you know to church. And the reason we chose the number 3 is because, honestly, not all of them are going to say yes. The truth is, when we invite people to church, not all the time do they say yes. I wish they did, but they don't. And so we figure that by casting our nets wide, by inviting 3 people, maybe 1 person will say yes. And it'll be a glorious day when we can watch what God can do by us inviting people and seeing what God can do when they come here. And so we're going to give you this postcard not only as a tool to invite them, something to remind them about the series and tell them what's going to be happening and encourage them to come, but we're also going to give it to you because it's going to be a way to help you to tell your story. It's going to be that segue so that you can begin to share that with them. You know, it's powerful, it's important to give somebody a card. That gives them lots of information. But the impact is even better when we can give a story behind it. Tell them why it would be an exciting thing and an important thing for them to come to church. And so that's the second thing that we're going to provide you with today. We're going to teach you today how to tell your story, how to put it together. Now, as we've said, all of us have a story. But the problem is that sometimes we just don't know how to tell it. And so we're going to give you a 3-step process that will allow you to tell your story. A 3-step process that might be just what your husband needs or your wife needs to encourage them to begin a relationship with Jesus Christ. A 3-step process that might just be what your child needs to encourage them to come back to church. A 3-step process that might just be that thing that begins to turn your friend's life around. A 3-step process that will begin to help you to put your story together. And the way that we're going to help you to do it is by showing you somebody else's story. When I ask myself the question, what's the easiest way to teach someone to tell their story? I figure the easiest way is to watch somebody else tell it. And so this morning we've been blessed. Anne-Marie Bell, right up here, you may have seen her last week. She's going to be teaching some of our fall Bible studies. She agreed this week to come in and record her testimony. And so we've broken it up into sections so that you can watch it throughout the sermon. And you can see how she shared her story. You can connect with the story of how God changed her life. But also, hopefully, you can begin to be inspired as to how to create your own story as well. You know, I think this is going to be a great series. I think this is a great tool that you're going to gain this morning. And so I figure the easiest way for us to do it is to just jump right in. If you want to take notes, you can take them on the back of your bulletin. There's plenty of space for you. We didn't fill it up with any type or anything like that. But I think that there's a lot of stuff you might want to take notes on. And so let's go through this 3-step process together. The process that we are going to be teaching you this morning is called the before, then, after process. And so obviously the first step in the before, then, after process is before. What was your relationship like before Jesus became the center of it? What was your relationship like before you had a real relationship with Jesus Christ, before God was the center of your life? You know, I think for most of us, we can think back to a period of time in our lives before Jesus was at the center of our lives. Maybe for you, it was when you were a kid, and you just didn't understand this stuff so well. And so you didn't really know what it meant for Jesus to be the center of your life, and so that's the before period for you. Maybe for others of you, it was a few weeks ago, a few months ago, a few years ago. Your life was headed in one direction, and then all of a sudden something happened. And it turned around, and now Jesus Christ is at the center of your life. For others of you, you may not be able to think of something. Maybe you can't think of a transformative moment, or maybe you think you don't have one. Maybe this is God kind of reminding you or encouraging you that you really haven't taken that step to let Christ be the center of your lives, and so you're kind of questioning this. Well, whatever it is, wherever you are, I think if you have a story, you've got a before. You've got a period of time, whether it's right now or sometime in the past, before Jesus was the center of your life. And as you begin to share your story, that's the way to start. Let them know what life was like before. When we think of that before section, it's that point in our lives when something was missing, when something was lacking before Jesus came in and kind of changed everything. And to give you an idea of what this will look like, let's show you Anne-Marie's before section.
Since I was a child, I was actually fairly active in church. I was a part of our Sunday school program, youth group, even Young Life. And it was all great, had a blast. However, as I even got older, probably my junior, senior year of high school, I started moving away from the church. And some would say my reasons were, I wanted to sleep, which was true because I had most of athletics on Saturday, so I would choose to sleep. At that point, too, my folks, my parents, would give us a choice. So my choice was like, well, okay, I guess I'll just sleep then, which was what I did. So then, I guess the next step in college, I veered even further and further away from the church and from Jesus and God, even with the firm foundation that I was given. I do know, however, though, looking back, that I did have that angel on my shoulder I know Jesus was doing some pretty big work because I made a lot of bad decisions, big mistakes, and I survived, without any major incidents, nothing medically wrong, nothing physically wrong, so, and that's the before part.
So what I love about this before section and the way she tells it, Emery tells it, is she can give you a clear sense that something was missing. Something was lacking. She started off in her life going to church and things like that, but she kind of drifted away. And something was missing as she went into that point in her life. It reminds me of another story that Jesus tells, or that the Gospel of John tells about Jesus. And I like to give illustrations every now and then, use visuals. So we've got a little friend up here who's going to help us tell this story. So one day, Jesus is going out and he's walking with his disciples. And as he's walking along, he sees this blind man. And when he looks at this blind man, something is moved and changed in Jesus. He just, something overcomes him. And so he walks up to this blind man. And without really saying a word at all, Jesus bends down into the dirt and he spits into it. Now, I imagine you probably don't want me to spit right now, so I'm just going to pour some water. And so as he spits into the ground, he takes that spit and he begins to kind of rub his fingers in it and form this little cake of mud. And then he takes off his potato head's eye patch and he puts this mud onto the guy's eyes, this blind man's eyes. And then after he does that, Jesus just says to the man, he says, get up and go wash your eyes in this particular pool that's down the road. And so the guy gets up and somehow he's able to navigate his way to this particular pool. And when he gets there, he bends down and he takes his eyes and he washes them. And when he comes up out of the water, all of a sudden, he can see. Well, the man's just amazed by this. Like, he can't believe what happens. And so he doesn't even say a word to Jesus. He just runs home. And as he's running home, he heads into his town. He runs to his parents and to his neighbors and everybody. And he just starts telling them about this miraculous thing that happened. This amazing thing that Jesus did in his life. And nobody can believe it. People actually believe he's an imposter, that this isn't the real guy, this isn't the same guy, because they just can't believe that somebody could go from being blind for so long to being able to suddenly see. And the people who really can't believe it are the religious leaders, these people who are supposed to believe in miracles. These religious leaders, when they see what's happened to him, they begin questioning him and asking him all sorts of things like, who did this to you? How did this happen? What's going on here? And he tells them Jesus is the man who did it. Jesus is the one who totally took his blindness and turned it into sight. And they still don't believe it. They start saying all sorts of terrible things about Jesus. They start calling him a sinner and just denying that he could ever do anything like this. And so finally the blind man's kind of had enough of this and he decides to kind of confront them. And I love how he phrases it. This is what he says. If you want to read the underlined words with me, he says, whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I do know. I was blind, but now I see. I was blind, but now I see. That's his before, then, after testimony. And the first part of it, the part we've got underlined, that's his before. I was blind. Something was missing in his life. Something was lacking. For him, it wasn't just his sight, but it was also his dignity. You know, in his world, people looked at blind people and considered that they were blind because they had done something wrong in their lives. Maybe they had sinned or their parents had sinned, somebody had sinned, and so they were being punished by being blind. And so not only would he have been without sight, but he'd have been ostracized in society. He'd have been pushed away. And that was what he was lacking. I was blind. When we see Anne Marie's story, we see that she was missing some things of her life. She had drifted away from the church, from the relationship with Jesus. She found herself in some very challenging, difficult situations, and something was missing in her life. Ask yourself, when you think of your story, what's your before? What was missing in your life? What was lacking before you started that relationship with Jesus Christ? When we think back to our stories, when we try to share our stories with other people, the thing we have to be able to show is change. And the only way that we can show change is to have a before, to have something that was lacking and to be able to show that that was fulfilled, that was changed by Jesus. And so every story begins with something lacking. Every story begins with a before. The second part to creating your own story, step 2, is then. You know, it's good to have a before part. It's good to show people what was missing, what was lacking. That's important to have it in a story. But if that's all you ever tell them, they're going to be like, wow, well, your life, it just kind of stinks. It's kind of like if Bigfoot were to wax his entire body. Something would be missing. And that's the same way that it would be with your story. If all you had was before, something would be lacking. So you have to have a then. You have to have this change that happened in your life. When we look at the blind man's story, we see it's this. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. That but now is his then moment. You know, I was blind, but then I met Jesus. And then I was able to see. Then things in my life began to change. I was blind, but now I see. That is his then moment. That's the climax to his story. And so think about it. What is the climax to your story? What's that then moment where things suddenly changed? When we look at Anne-Marie's story, we'll see that it starts in this way.
Okay, I believe the biggest change occurred with the death of my mom, which was 10 days after our son Hunter was born. So you can imagine the emotions. There was happiness and sadness at the same time, which put me in a very lost place. Everything was very surreal, as you know, most can imagine, for that first year. So even with grieving my mom and having to raise our son and our daughter, you know, I was just lost. Then my girlfriend, Jennifer Gresham, had mentioned randomly in one of our play groups if anyone would like to join her in a Bible study, that her church, Great Bridge Presbyterian, was starting on a Tuesday morning. And that voice said, yeah, I'd be interested in starting this. And so it was in September of 2008 I started with the Tuesday morning group with 15, not even 15 of us women, I believe, or so. And once I started doing the study, I knew then what I had been missing. Everything was put back into perspective, and you can think about it, and it may not sound always nice, but because of my mom's death, I was able to turn my life around and turn it back towards God and back towards Jesus. And through that turnaround and the women I was with is when I really started to heal in all facets. I don't think there was a class that went by that I probably didn't cry with the girls.
I'm sure that's still a bit of kind of an emotional thing to look back on, and I think that's what's so powerful about the climax of our story. That's that emotional high point. That's that moment where things really change. And what I love about Anne-Marie's story here and the way she tells her testimony is that it's not just a moment. You know, it's a climax, it's a change in the story, but it's not just a moment. It was this progress from her mom's death to getting involved in this Bible study and some other things that happened after that. And I think that's how our relationship with Jesus works sometimes. I mean, it's not just this instant necessarily where everything changes, but it's a process that takes time. Some of you might even feel like you're still in that process. God's still chipping away at all the different stuff that's going on in your life, all the shame and the hurt and the guilt and the pride and all the other stuff that's keeping you from really letting go and letting God in. And if that's where you are, then the good news is that that's a process, and it's going to get better, and God's going to do even greater things in your life. But what you want to look for in your life is you want to look for that climactic moment, that transformative moment when things began to change. That's your then in your story. And what you really want to do is you want to find a way to help people connect with it. You want to give them some sort of image that they can see as they hear this story. When we think of the blind man, all he had to do was show them his eyes and say, I was blind, but now I see. And there's that climax. His eyes tell the story. When you look at Anne-Marie's story, I imagine every time you see a small group, that reminds you of that moment that you had, that change that began in your life. And so think about what it is for you. For me, it's every time I go upstairs in my parents' house and look at my bed in my old bedroom. Because that was where I remember praying one night, and when in the midst of all that trouble I was in at 16 years old, and just saying, God, I'm done taking and taking and taking from you. I'm ready to start giving myself to you, whether or not you get me out of this. That's that place for me. And you don't have to necessarily take the person there physically. If it happened for you at a campsite or a retreat center, you don't have to take them there. You don't have to sign them up for a small group so they can experience it there. It would have been a little awkward if every time a girl came over to my house, I said, I'd love to tell you about my relationship and how God changed my life. Would you like to come up to my bedroom with me? It just really wouldn't have worked. So you don't have to take them there physically, but you got to take them there mentally. You got to give them that picture, help them to imagine what happened in your life so they can begin to connect with your story. And when they feel that climactic moment, they're hooked, they're into it, and the last thing you share with them is the after. It's the before, then, after process, and so the last part is after. Now the after part is how your life changed once Jesus came into your life, once he became the center of your life. What was different in your life? What changed in your life? In the blind man's story, it's pretty obvious for us. I was blind, that's his before, but now, then, I see. After Jesus came to his life, he gained vision. But he didn't just gain physical vision. He also gained spiritual vision. From that point on, Jesus became the center of his life. Jesus became the heart of who he was. No matter how much those religious leaders interrogated him, no matter how much they threatened him, he wasn't going to give up on Jesus. Jesus had changed his life, and he was devoted to him forever. His life was forever changed. The after was this huge transformation for him where his life was different because Jesus was now a part of it. And so as we look at our stories, we want to think, what's your after? What changed in your life? As we look at this last clip from Anne-Marie, it gives us a good sense of how we can tell the story of how things were different after Jesus became the center of our lives.
I can tell you that my life is infinitely better with God and Jesus being the center of the life that I have with my husband and our children. And I've learned so much, especially in the last 4 years. Even when I was active as a youth, I've learned and I've grown. And at this point, I know I feel more peaceful. I feel more centered. I feel more secure. And even I feel more confident in who I am and how I can just approach my life knowing I've got things in line. And I know that they're not always perfect. There are ups and downs. And, the cliche is God doesn't give us more than we can handle. And there are times where I want to ask and wonder why, but it's okay. I'm okay with that. 4 years ago, I would have never thought that I'd be wanting and asking to lead a Sunday school class, a women's Bible study class on my own. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm not afraid to talk about my relationship with Jesus and God. It doesn't really bother me anymore. I'm not shy. I don't go and Bible beat people to death about it, but I'm not afraid to talk about, oh yeah, I've got to go do something up at church, or I'm leading a women's Bible study. And people I have encountered, they're more interested and maybe even surprised than not. So it gets them to wonder, So that is the after part. That's where it's the good stuff. And that's my story, and I'm going to stick to it.
What I love about that after part in her story is she talks about how she feels. It's one thing just to tell somebody your story and just to kind of tell them what happened, and that can be powerful and have an impact. But it's a whole different thing to share with someone how it made you feel, how it changed you not only on the outside but on the inside, how it changed the way you feel every single day. And this happens in all different areas of our lives. Let me give you some examples from Leanne in my life. When Leanne and I were dating, we had a lot of friends who were married. And so we got to hear all these stories of how great marriage was for them, all the things they got to do with each other, all the experiences they got to have, and the way they felt just being married. And I remember hearing those stories got me excited about marriage. It made me want to get married even more. And then when we finally did tie the knot, I got to experience all that they'd been hyping me up, getting me excited about, and realized it was even better than I ever thought it was beforehand, just by hearing their stories. Well, now when we look at our lives, we see that a lot of the people we know, they're not just married, but now they're having kids. And of course, we have no idea when we're going to start having kids or try to have kids or any of that stuff. But just the whole process of hearing them tell that story. Now they're telling how they feel about having kids. They're talking about how they feel, seeing the excitement of all these experiences that are going on in their lives. And here I am, somebody who just a couple of years ago was totally terrified of the idea of having kids, the idea of how much life would change once kids came into it. But by hearing their stories, it begins to kind of break you down. It kind of begins to soften you up about this experience. There's still days when I'm terrified, when I see kids running around and screaming and yanking at their parents. And there are times when I wonder if Leanne and I could still stay married if I became a priest, she became a nun, and we moved into a convent. But by hearing their stories, it has definitely softened me up, and it's definitely even got me a little excited about the idea. And that's what your story can do. That's what your after can do. That's the effect that it can have on people. We live in a world full of people who have lots of sadness in their lives, lots of brokenness. They've never experienced that transformation. They realize, people realize something's missing in their lives, but they don't know what it is, and they don't know where to find it. But you can give it to them. You can help them to have that experience in their lives by sharing your story. So may you go forth from this place and may you begin to put your story together. May you sit down and think about your before, then, and after, and let it excite you for the experiences you've had in your life. May you look at the card that you took off last week of the lost person you know, and may you continue to pray for that person, that they might be open to hear your story. May you take this postcard that we're going to give you as you leave today, and may you pray over it and pray that the people you give it to will begin to allow you to share your story with them. May you look for any opportunity God can give you to share this story of your life, because God has done something amazing in your life, and through that story wants to transform others' lives. So may you be empowered, may you be emboldened, and may you share a story with other people. Let's pray.